Hello, welcome to the program. Ahead, we'll take a look at the fallout from At Home with Julia, the ABC's mockumentary on the life of our PM. Another raft of changes announced to 10's news lineup, and why Jamie Jury's popularity may be on the wane. But first, the inside word on what the ad buyers make of 7's new lineup for 2012. The network stars were out in force on Wednesday night as 7 unveiled next year's schedule. It includes a raft of new locally produced programs, as well as renewals for popular series like Winners and Losers, X Factor and Wild Boys. There's a new sports talk show and, of course, the AFL, which will dominate Friday nights. Now, our co-host James Manning, editor and publisher of Mediaweek, was at the launch last night, and he's joined by Nick Keenan, head of investment at Mediacom. Gentlemen, good to see you both. James, I'll start with you. What were the highlights from the launch last night?
Well, the highlights, I think it was almost a bit of a changing the guard at 7. You know, David Leckie kicked it off, but he was up there with the sort of the new team who'll take the continue the good work that he's been doing over the years. I think Tim Warner probably gave the main presentation. He's the man expected to probably step up, take David Leckie's role when he might move on to a more chairman sort of position. The new sales head, Kurt Burnett, and his sort of lieutenants, Nikki Rook and Adam Elliott, gave the presentations. Not a lot of new content, and we probably didn't expect it. You know, most things they've had, as we've sort of tracked this year, week by week, have been winners. They've had very little week in their schedule. If there was a weakness, probably Thursday nights, but Better Homes and Gardens is moving there now because of their AFL commitment, so that'll certainly shore that up. A couple of new Australian programs you alluded to, two from the people at Working Dog, Sporting Fever, like a sports comedy show. Expect that to go somewhere near the AFL. And a program called Pictures of You, a bit of a tearjerker where celebrities bring in their sort of family albums and talk through their childhood and stuff like that. Kath and Kim project coming up. And a reality show, Please Marry My Boy, where mothers choose the girlfriends their sons can date.
You can see, I won't go where I was just about to go with that. Nick, over to you. How much have the networks really been pushing you guys since, you know, we've now seen most of them come out and tell us what's going to be on the box next year? How are sort of the negotiations coming along already?
I mean, look, it's going to be very important for them because we're in a softer market now than we were last year. So the networks have been very busy PRing all the different sort of content that they've got, how they've performed this year and what they've got on the cards for next year, which is what last night was all about. I think, you know, in terms of TV negotiations, that season's beginning for the rest of the market. We don't actually do ours. We do our negotiations by fiscal year to avoid the Christmas rush, so to speak. So from our point of view, it's a bit of a sit back and we'll see how they go. But yeah, they're absolutely lobbying, and I think 7 they've had a fantastic year. You know, they've won every single ratings week this week. They're up sort of 10% across total people, and when you spread that across the other demos, they've done exceptionally well. So they're in a strong position.
How much are 9 and 10 going to hurt when it comes to where the money goes for 2012? Because you trade off what they're doing now, I guess, don't you? You don't really like to forecast, do you, where they'll be?
Well, look, we do forecast. I mean, crystal balling's always a you know, it's one of the dangerous games. I mean, just ask people who forecast that Renovators was going to be the #1 hit show for the year, and I think, you know, you see the territory you can get into trouble. But look, you do go off past performance. What I would say is, first of all, it's a very competitive market. And the money doesn't flow out as quickly as the audience fluctuations would suggest. So I think that puts a lot of pressure on a sales team for Network 7. I think you know, you've got the top performing network and everyone's expecting you to get these huge wins within revenue. But, you know, there's many different combinations that you can buy television. And when you drill down into, say, the 16 to 39-year-old demographic or the 25 to 54-year-old demographic, which they're the two most important. They're over 65% of the TV revenue in the marketplace. So it's a closer horse race when you get into those two. I think, you know, when you look at sort of 25 to 54, it's you know, anywhere from sort of 20.5 down to, you know, with 7 in the lead to 9 to 28. So
you're suggesting 7 can't increase their rates too much?
Well, yes, there's that. But look, they will definitely get more revenue. But how much is you know, is obviously the big question. But it's not an easy job to do because there's plenty of choice.
You mentioned the Renovators, shows like that. What's the situation now for advertisers, I don't know if they've taken a long-term commitment or they've obviously come out of this season and thought, well, we didn't get what we wanted. What are they asking for now from 10? Do they still want make good? Do they want, you know, freebies in next year's season? Are they happy to continue with next year's season?
Look, from what we're told, it'll definitely be back next year, and they'll look at the format and they'll take the feedback that they've had from viewers in terms of why they didn't think it performed very well. But to answer your question, you'd have to be a real fool not to get audience protection when you go into untried content like this. Agencies that know what they're doing would have had audience protections through all the different agreements they would have had placed in those sponsorships. We certainly did, and yes, you get make goods. Now, whether that make good appears within Renovators continuing to run when it's not doing very well, or whether that's make goods across the rest of the network, the only difficulty that comes in is when you've got particularly creative that is particularly created around the show. And so that creative is relevant to that show only, and that's where it gets really tricky. And you do tend to need that show to continue. But the rest of the make goods can be from anywhere. I think there's an audience number we have to have, and at a certain rate.
Good luck looking for sponsors for Renovators 2012, I guess. You'd need a pretty good deal, wouldn't you? But just on that television revenue, Caesar released their figures for the first half revenues this year. Television was pretty flat. Metro TV virtually stayed the same as it did last year. That's sort of both direct and agency money. Regional was very down slightly. What's the feel of the market out there? Is it going to stay that way, do you think? And we expect to see, companies maybe spending a bit more, or are they just going to be playing it safe?
Look, it's a good question. Last year, we had an advertising boom, which we all know. In 2010, television was up 18%. Okay, it's flat this year, but to be flat on 18% is actually a very good result. So I think the nervousness probably for a lot of the networks is that there's a lot more content. We had the launch of the digital channels last year, and we've had more launches of digital channels this year, and the digital channels now make up 22% of primetime viewing. So that needs money to support the content that they're running on those shows in order to maintain that level of quality on those secondary channels. But in terms of what we think of the market, I think it has been surprisingly resilient considering what we've dealt with this year. We've had a number of economic shocks in terms of we've had floods at the beginning of the year. We had the tsunami in Japan. We've had a European debt crisis that is continuing, and even today there's the stock market going back again. So we've had a stock market crash. And we've had Middle Eastern unrest. So, and out of all of that, when you look at January to August, and I always look at the SMI data, which is agency revenue, but that's 55% of the market, and essentially we're still growing at 1%, which I think we've performed very well, and we're still growing at 1% when you take out a considerable budget that was spent for the federal election last year. There was 50 million just in August alone last year that wasn't spent this year. So it's done very well. I think we're predicting next year the forecast from anywhere of 3 or 4% growth, but that is with a caveat that we don't get a complete meltdown in the Eurozone, and that we don't get the level of economic shocks that we've had to withstand this year, because I think that the consumer out there has had enough.
Nick, we've run out of time, but just one really, really quick question, so 20 seconds or less. The media inquiry that's been announced into print and online, is that something that you guys are taking much notice of? No,
not really. I think it's more, I think that's politics, and we work in media, and there's no suggestion that News Limited has behaved in terms of what has happened in the UK, and I don't think there's any teeth to that inquiry anyway, given the fact that it's so specifically aimed at print and online publishing and ignoring the rest of the media. I think it just makes it pretty silly, really.
Nick Keenan, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a check of the media sector's performance on the share market this week. Here's Chris Weston from IG Markets in Melbourne.
Yeah, good afternoon, Coles. We've seen a slight outperformance this week from our media companies, up until today, that is. Certainly if you look at the price action, we'd seen APN flat on the week. We'd seen Fairfax up about 11%. That stock's been doing very well. News Corp was up about 2.8%. We'd seen 10 flat on the week. We'd seen Southwest Media up 2.7%. APN was having some good gains, and we'd also seen Seek chalk out a small gain as well. That's been reversed today. Overnight, we did see the FOMC meeting, which seemed to have disappointed people. Certainly, Ben Bernanke giving a slightly more dour estimate of the US economy, hence why we're seeing News Corp coming under some serious pressure today, down about 2.8%. So the media stocks are going in line with the market, and we are seeing a bit of a reverse. Now, Fairfax is a pretty interesting stock for me at the moment. I have been talking about it quite a lot recently. We saw some more insider buying from Gareth Morgan, who's one of the non-executive directors. He bought a fair chunk of stock for his super fund on market over the week, and that sort of goes in line with some of the other insiders who have been buying stock recently, which is always a bullish sign to see. We also look at the short interest with Fairfax because it's the second most heavily traded stock in terms of short sellers on the market, and it has been for quite some time. We did actually see a slight decline in short interest. Now that declined about 0.5%, but you've still got a stock where 13% of the total issued capital of the stock is sold short. These are people who are trying to bet from a falling price by borrowing a stock to sell back. Now, we've still got about, as I say, 13% or about $284 million, so that could create some good upside going forward. They did have an AGM this week, and they put out to shareholders nothing that we didn't know already, that they're potentially going to use the proceeds of the IPO of TradeMe and also some of the sale of the radio assets to increase their dividend or increase the payout ratio, which would be very positive, and also reduce debt. So that's been an interesting stock. If you focus on those short sellers, it's been interesting to look at the overall ASX top 20. Seek is actually the 12th most heavily shorted stock, and we actually saw their short interest pick up 10% over the last 5 days, which is quite interesting. That now has about 5% of total issue capital sold short. APN as well, people looking for that stock to benefit from falling down as well by seeing their share price drop. That short interest picked up about 6%. That's now the 16th most heavily shorted stock on the ASX 200. So we've got 3 media stocks in the whole of the ASX 200 which are sold short and seeing big increases in short interest there. The other stock we're looking at quite closely is News Corp. For me, still the most attractive stock in the media complex at the moment. We did see Chase Carey as the deputy chairman coming out at a conference in Goldman Sachs conference in the States, coming out and denying the allegations, saying that he didn't see anything that they'd done wrong at the moment. And we're looking at their share buyback. That's now 22% complete. They've actually bought back about $67 million worth of shares at the moment, and that seems to be supporting the stock, at least in the short term.
Well, being devoid of advertising or a market listing, it's not often we focus on the public broadcaster here on Mediaweek, but its latest offering, At Home with Julia, is causing plenty of ructions, not with the agencies, but definitely in Canberra and in the court of public opinion. Wednesday night's episode in particular. Here's a bit of what the brouhaha's all about.
I can't believe we're doing this.
John and Jeanette must have got it away a few times in here.
Oh! I don't know what I mean.
The mockumentary of our PM's life behind closed doors has the ABC in damage control with plenty of criticism. That scene in particular has gone beyond acceptable standards. Well, Mark Day is a columnist with The Australian, and we're keen to see what he makes of the debate. Mark, thanks for coming in. Is the criticism, the reaction that we've seen in the press to this program, in your view, is it an overreaction, or is it a little bit icky to see the Prime Minister and her partner doing whatever they were doing underneath the Australian flag?
I think it's predictable, but anybody who gets upset by this, I say, hey, get a life, for crying out loud. It's satire, it's a cartoon, it's a caricature, it's entertainment. You know, nobody should be upset by this.
I guess the commercial stations would love this sort of furore because they'd be generating some chat
I'm sure
about.
Mark Scott loves it too. Look, I think we're old enough and grown up enough to cater for this kind of thing. It's a satirical commentary. She's the Prime Minister, and political commentary we've had for generations, for hundreds of years. And because it's our first female Prime Minister, we raise an eyebrow over whether she should be portrayed in a kind of human way.
Do you think it's, I mean, a lot of the criticism has been specifically about that scene with, you know, the Australian flag. Yes. Is that an obvious way for, you know, the tabloid newspapers, I suppose, to kick up a bit of a furore with the bets and stuff?
But there are no laws that govern the use of the Australian flag in this way. For instance, Pauline Hanson is entitled to drape herself in it and be photographed for publicity purposes. The producers here haven't broken any law by defiling it in this manner. But it is very much in the eye of the beholder. A lot of people will say, oh, tut-tut. But, you know, when all is said and done, it's a joke, Joyce.
Would this happen overseas? Is it?
Yes, yes. And of course, Little
Not
Britain.
breaking any ground here.
Yeah. In a slightly different manner, yes, Prime Minister and yes, Minister, they took the mickey out of politicians and the office of Prime Minister. But you know, I would have thought that most people look at Julia Gillard and think about her policies rather than thinking about anything else, as they did with Maggie Thatcher, and probably as they did with Bob Hawke and Gough Whitlam. You know, are they performing politically? Not. What are they doing at home at night?
I just want to bring in David Lipson, Sky News reporter in Canberra, because he's been following the ructions that this has been calling in the nation's capital. Lippo, what's the House been making of this program?
Well, it was interesting. Good afternoon to everyone. It was interesting because after the first episode, it was a bit of a lukewarm response from senators and MPs. They thought it wasn't all that funny, but they weren't too upset by it. They thought the independents particularly were very funny, and the dog that's called Bill Shorten and the like. It wasn't until that second episode came around, that scene that you saw, that we really started to see some outrage out there in the public arena, and interestingly from both sides of politics, because indeed it was a Nationals senator from the Coalition party room that seemed to cause the biggest sort of stir, John Forrest, with an outburst in the party room where he said having sex in the Prime Minister's office underneath the Australian flag is the last straw for me. And another Liberal actually questioned the ABC's funding over this program. Now, Tony Abbott, the leader, certainly hasn't gone anywhere near that, anywhere near as far as that. But just for a taste of what he thinks, here's what he said on his way into work this morning.
Look, you know, the point I've made all along is that we shouldn't see tacky television, but if people are seeing tacky television, they can just turn it off.
And as for the criticisms themselves, well, you've mentioned one of them, that it's distasteful. Others say that it demeans the office of the Prime Minister. And others, again, point out that they don't think this program would ever have been aired if it was John Howard or any male Prime Minister with a wife in the lodge. And it wouldn't have happened if Tim Matheson, Julia Gillard's partner, was a high-flying lawyer or another very successful business person. They feel that somehow, because he's a hairdresser, or was a hairdresser, that he's considered to be fair game. And for that, they see it as some sort of double standard.
Yeah, Lippo, I think that was something Mark Day was touching on. Thanks for that.
Mark, just on that, I'm not sure if that's true, if they wouldn't go there, but it's an interesting commentary too on the outsourcing debate, because this was outsourced to a private sector.
Yeah, but the ABC has final responsibility, and the ABC, I'm sure Kim Dalton would have been able to say, no, we won't go there. But look, the ABC has a long and proud history of breaking new territory, most times later picked up by the commercials. Talking about tacky television, did anyone see the embarrassing body bits on Channel 9 around midnight last night? That was tacky, and yes, I turned it off.
What were you doing watching that at midnight last night?
That is the point.
Insomnia,
You've got ultimate control over what you watch. There's an off button, and I think the audience for next week will be very large. If anybody's got any cause for complaint about this, you know, it's Tim Matheson, because he's been portrayed as a brainless bogan, and you know, what's the poor guy done? Nothing. He's the one who should be shouting from the hilltops about this.
Mark Day, thank you for coming in. Good to see you as always. Coming up on Media Week, extra sheen. Charlie's departure from 2.5 Men, no loss for 9, with Ashton Kutcher pulling in the big numbers. Stay with us.